Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming along at 17:45. It's very good of you to do that. So I don't know if any of you, how many of you were in the session before, the peer review? Okay, thank you, good. So the other ones aren't here, so it was obviously that terrible that they obviously didn't come back, or the pub's open as we normally do. Yeah. So anybody? So the session I did earlier on was about innovations in Hadoop. This session is about a concept of what's called a data lake or a data reservoir, and I'm going to talk about what they are, how they work, and this new tool called Oracle Big Data Discovery, what it is, how it works again, and where the value is. And then tomorrow, I'm going to do a workshop in the morning, 9 till 12, where we're going to go through what I've talked about here and what I've talked about in the previous session. I'll actually be doing it. So I'll actually be doing a live demo and going into how these things work. And what I'll be doing in tomorrow's session is I've been capturing all the Twitter activity around a few Oracle sites, so Oracle Magazine, Oracle Profit, Oracle Archbeat, and so on, and putting those into, or capturing that and putting that into Hadoop, and I'll be using that as a data source. I'll be loading that into a data reservoir. I'll be using Big Data Discovery on that to do things like sentiment analysis, so trying to understand, you know, whether comments are good or bad or whatever, looking at things like influencers and communities. Actually, so I'll be doing that live in tomorrow's session. So that'll be kind of a hands-on sort of session. But what I thought I'd do now is go into more detail on what this thing called a data reservoir is, and then give you an overview of this tool called Big Data Discovery. Okay, so that's the kind of point of this session here. So if you obviously told me earlier on, so you know who I am. A bit of background though is that I've been doing this now for about 15 years. So I had a little kind of write-up on Oracle Magazine. One funny thing about Oracle Magazine is they always manage to take a worse photo every kind of like every time they take one, it's that much worse. And the latest one was so bad that my son was just looking on the internet and he found it and he went, "Oh my God." And I thought, if your son says that, that's not good, really. That's not good. So I look a murderer in the last one. So I sort of preserved this one from a few years ago. But my background was in relational data warehousing and Discoverer and tools like that. And I also keep every kind of presentation that I come across over the years. So there's a few here that I've got from many, many years ago. Those of you who've been doing Oracle for a while might remember the old kind of black background slides that were there. And the days actually when everything in the Oracle world was built around the Oracle database and ran on SQL and PL SQL, which actually probably some of you would say, that's how it should be now, you know, because it kind of runs well and whatever. But there was a time when back in Oracle 9i, 8i, 9i, and so on, when everything to do with analytics was based around the Oracle database. And this was a typical kind of architecture that we had in those days. And kind of fast forward many, many years, and we had things like OBI, and we had, you know, all the acquisitions that Oracle made. And the kind of, you know, as I said earlier on, the topic now everyone talks about is kind of big data. Okay, so this is the kind of, if we look at, and we saw earlier on, various architectures around big data, combining it with data warehouse, but big data is the big sort of topic at the moment, hence me being here, I suppose. And one of the common design patterns or architecture patterns that we see talked about is this thing called a data lake or a data reservoir, which is interesting because every time interesting is a word in English that can mean so many things, really, it's a polite way of saying crazy, or a polite way of saying interesting, or whatever. But data reservoirs can be kind of interesting, really. And so what we're going to do in this session is look at what one is, and then look at how we can get value out of it, how we can access it, and so on, really. But you know, the first question most people ask us really is, you know, what is a data reservoir? Now, what is this thing, a data lake or a data reservoir? You know, what does it do? And does it replace a data warehouse? Okay, so that's the kind of those are the typical kind of questions that we get asked by people. So the background to a data reservoir or a data lake is that, you know, data from, I suppose, news sources, social sources, kind of big data sources, kind of feeds and so on there, they can be, you know, as I said, they can be strange. we're used to getting data for reporting from, say, Business Suite or from other applications, and it comes nicely arranged in tables, and if you're lucky, you've got things like primary keys and so on and so forth. But data that comes in to a data reservoir or into a Hadoop kind of project typically can be like JSON documents. They can be kind of key value pairs, log files, sensor readings or whatever. And we find these sources are being brought into projects now and into customers because they're looking to get this kind of like total view of the customer, looking to understand the kind of external interactions that are going on. Is for the example that I'm going to show tomorrow, we're going to bring in data from Twitter, and that data arrives typically as JSON kind of documents. So this data arrives in a form that is not kind of tabular, and it is not kind of columns and tables and so on and so forth. Now, what's also interesting is that users, they want this data now, but they don't know what they want it for, which is kind of, might laugh and so on there, but there's a valid thing there. So everybody, if you imagine, you're a company, you're trying to innovate, you're trying to kind of get ahead of the curve. There's data out there. You might be offered and so one of our customers is a big automobile sort of like association, I suppose, in the UK. I don't even know who that is, but anyway. And they've been there. They're bringing in data from all different kind of companies that offer them telemetry data. And so they've been offered this. They've got no idea what they're going to do with it, but they kind of feel they ought to do something with it because there's going to be some value in there. Okay. Now the problem is they haven't really decided on what they're going to do with it. They haven't really understood what the structure is. So the typical process that we go through as kind of BI and data warehousing developers is probably not kind of ideal here because we have to kind of go through a curation process. They just want to get access to the data. Now also the schema can change over time. So if you think about Twitter, so Twitter, if you get tweets from Twitter in JSON kind of format, depending on what features the user who made the tweet has used, whether they've done a retweet, whether they've kind of embedded an image, whether they've got location sort of sensors turned on their phone, you're going to get a different kind of schema coming through potentially with each tweet. And then Twitter themselves may well evolve that schema over time. So again, this doesn't lend itself to a more formalized kind of data modeling situation with kind of data warehouses. But the end users, they want it now, and they don't want it when your ETL team have developed everything. And I think there's a kind of a saying in IT that systems reach a level of perfection and then they become obsolete. And the mainframe is a classic example. Probably if you were a mainframe developer, for many, many years, you looked at Oracle and mini computers and VAXes and Unix and so on, and just said, look, we did that years ago. We did that much, much better. But you guys, you're not interested. And so, but the users, they want it now. They want to see access to the data, not when you brought it through your kind of curation process. So a typical data warehouse. Imagine this is kind of Oracle, or maybe it's Netezza or something. There's a kind of formal ETL process, and rightly so. So to bring data into your data warehouse, you have to kind of understand the data. You have to kind of build your dimensional model. You have to then load it using your ETL tool. And compared to years ago, when you have to hand code it, it can be a lot quicker. So you can reuse kind of design patterns and templates from, say, OWB or Informatica or whatever. But it's a kind of long process really to bring data through. And also ETL development is kind of fragile as well. And there are agile methodologies you can use. We have a methodology method that we use Golden Gate, and we use ODI, and we use OBI, and we use agile approaches to kind of to automate and to kind of test as much as we can. But ETL is typically a kind of fragile process really. And dimensional modeling again is a process that takes time. And so this is something that users might not want to invest in on day one. Okay, it's something you want to have over time, but maybe not on day one. Another thing really is, and again this is a big generalization, but databases like Oracle, there's traditionally a kind of, I suppose there's a typical kind of sweet spot or maximum size you want to go to really. And I typically, when I'm in an Oracle audience, I normally say this is Teradata I'm talking about here. But typically with Teradata, the kind of joke is that everything you do costs $1 million. You know, every kind of server you buy costs $1 million. So if you kind of, you know, obviously it's not Teradata I'm talking about here, but it's, you know, everything here costs money really. And so, you know, there's a kind of limit to, I suppose, how big these things can get really, and you can afford to pay for. Now again, with the Oracle database, there's meant to be, you know, sharding coming along. I think if you've got a ULA, so you can effectively have as many servers as you want, that's kind of good. But, you know, size and costs can become an issue. So as we saw earlier on, there's this concept of Hadoop. This is all about kind of, you know, have cheap servers, distributed processing, do it kind of cheaply, scale out, and kind of, you know, almost kill it with iron sort of thing. Now the other thing is, going back to, we talked about kind of the flexibility of schemas and so on. Hadoop is a kind of great platform because it's all file based, because it's flexible schema to do this kind of work where we use Hadoop a bit like a sort of exploratory lab. So we can bring data in, we can land it, we can use tools that allow you to work with flexible schemas or no schemas, and we can do kind of very interesting work with it. And so in the session, tomorrow when I do the workshop, I'll be landing this data in this kind of JSON format, and we'll be looking at how we can make use of it, how we can work with it, and so on. The other thing is, as we saw earlier on, Hadoop is designed for kind of real-time storage of data. So stuff comes in as kind of streaming files, streaming kind of feeds. We can land it in very kind of raw form in Hadoop, and so on really. So, you know, and that can be all different kind of things as well. So typically Hadoop is a nice platform for doing this exploratory work. It's got its place. It's not something you'd run everything on, but if you're doing this kind of very speculative, very kind of early kind of prototyping work with data, it's a nice kind of area to do innovation and so on there. Okay, and then we can hang off applications off of it here. And so one of the things that we're going to look at in this session is one of those applications, which is called big data discovery. Okay, so this is the kind of and I mean, we could talk about this for, you know, I mean, it's a kind of conversation for the pub really, but one of the interesting things is kind of, you know, the beauty of Hadoop is that you can defer defining the schema and the data model until later on. But of course, at some point, you've got to pay that cost. And it's whether you want to push that cost onto the end users or whether you want to push the cost onto the developers, really. What I'm trying to say is there's time and a place for each of those. And then we can do all clever stuff with it as well, where we can kind of use things like data modeling and data mining, predictive modeling, and so on and so forth. So this is the typical kind of way that we see data reservoirs being used. And then going back to the original diagram here, this is the kind of the architecture we would use here. And put it into kind of Oracle terms, it would be a big data appliance, an Exadata machine. You'd use kind of ODI over here, Golden Gate, big data discovery, and all these kind of things here. So this is the kind of state of the art, and we're building this out for customers now. This is a fairly common kind of like you know, engagement that we would do with customers now. But interestingly, I mean, I had this conversation with one of our sales team the other day where they'd kind of sold this into a customer, and they kind of said, "But what do we do? How do we what you know? What do we do now? How do we build it? You know?" And the kind of challenge a little bit is if you're going to work with these kind of data lake environments here, all bets are off really in terms of how you kind of work. You know, how you can kind of access the data, how you can work with it, get value from it, and so on. Because this concept of a data lab that we see, and there's an architecture we took part in developing with Oracle, where we split an organization into innovation and kind of business as usual. We had a data lab, we had production, all this kind of stuff. This idea of a data lab is very different to what we used to do with working with OBI and so on, because, you know, we've got data that's in very raw form. We've got this kind of do anything sandbox environment. You know, there's perimeter security, and that's about it. And this idea of agile experimentation, ability to fail fast, and so on. So this is typically the kind of scenario we have when we're getting value out of data that we've loaded into a data reservoir. And I say in tomorrow's session, I will actually, you know, do it. I'll actually kind of load stuff in, show you it. We'll query it using Hive. We'll query it using various things, and then we'll kind of see it working. But the challenge a little bit for customers here is, as I said, how do we get value out of this? And there's this concept of a data scientist, which must be kind of a guy called Brendan Tierney, who we work with. It must be his kind of dream, because the most boring job in the company has suddenly become the most interesting job. So if you're a statistician, if you were the company statistician, then you had the most boring job in the world. You were just sitting there and you were compiling stats that nobody read, and you had a kind of a cardigan on and glasses and all this kind of stuff. Now suddenly you're the kind of sexiest person in the company, and you're driving a Ferrari and all this kind of stuff. Apart from Brendan, who still manages to kind of do that not sort of sexy vibe sort of thing. But anyway, but basically, data scientists are elusive. Okay, so the idea here is, what do we do? What do we do to make it so we're not constantly having to hire Brendan Tierney and put him an address and all this kind of stuff? And so this is kind of where it's interesting. What do we do? What do we do now? Now, funny enough, this situation about how do we make sense of data that is unstructured and raw and so on has a bit of a history within Oracle BI. So going back a few years, going back to 2012, those of you from the UK, so Chris and myself, remember there was the London Olympics back in 2012, which, being British, we just assumed and just really wanted to be terrible and awful and all that. And just to kind of really spite us, it was really good. And we won loads of medals, which was kind of interesting, as we say. So there's the 2012 Olympics. So also in that year, we had this guy as well. So this is where the music starts, and I sort of do the dance for about 5 minutes and so on. But he was around 2012 as well. So he's... I've forgotten his name now. My kids played it constantly all the time. So he was around then. But there was also a product called Oracle Endeca. So has anyone here used Endeca? No. Anyone here heard that song? Yes, obviously. Yes. So so Endeca obviously had a massive impact in Latvia. So the rest of my session will be particularly kind of pointless. But anyway, but Endeca was a product. Now, one of the great things about working with Oracle, but not for Oracle, you can be very rude about their products, and then no one can say anything about it. So there was a product called Endeca Information Discovery, which I said at the time was a problem looking for a solution, really. So no, a solution looking for a problem. Every time I get that wrong. It completely misses the point of the joke. But it was a solution looking for a problem. Okay, in that it was this tool that could do analysis of in quotes, unstructured data, but no data really is really unstructured, but data that kind of had to have its structure induced out of it or derived out of it or something. But this product, Oracle Endeca Information Discovery, was around. Oracle bought a company called Endeca and spent a fortune on buying this company. This was quite a niche product, and I spent many a conference explaining it and so on, but no one bought it because, well, I mean, that's probably a massive overstatement, but it was an unstructured analysis tool that was slightly ahead of its time and was limited by the amount of data you could store on your laptop. Okay, but it had a clever thing in it. Had a clever NoSQL analytics stroke kind of calculation engine inside it called the Endeca server, which was the real value in the Endeca product. So what it was a NoSQL database that stored data in a kind of a key value pair sort of format. You could just chuck anything in there, and if there were common reference points between the data, so it had maybe a common ID, a customer ID in one, a customer ID in the other, it would let you kind of like join across them and navigate across them. It had this kind of this phrase, no data left behind, which the idea was you chuck everything in there and it would kind of sort it out. And load and go. I mean, when this came out, we were kind of like scoffing to ourselves because, no data left behind, load and go, that sort of thing. But it made sense, and it was used a lot. One of the sweet spots for the product was in things like data discovery, where imagine there was a good demo out there that's Chicago police crime stats, and they were chucked in all the kind of records, all of the information, all the kind of textual stuff about kind of crimes that have been committed in Chicago, which makes you laugh because the next OD Tug event is in Chicago. And if you read that demo, you wouldn't go in 100 miles of kind of Chicago, or anywhere really, to be honest, But the point is, you can chuck everything in there, and it would let you make sense of it. Okay, which is kind of getting interesting because that's a good potential solution for what we're trying to do here. where we have data landing into a data reservoir. We want to make sense of it. We want to be able to get schema out of it. We want to do kind of searching of it and so on. And so Endeca Server and the Endeca product was kind of reborn as Oracle Big Data Discovery. Suddenly it made sense because it ran on Hadoop. It suddenly had a purpose and a set of customers. And so this is what we're looking at now. And so we'll see, again, I'll be using this tomorrow in my workshop. And the key thing is, it's a bit, well, I'm trying not to repeat Oracle's marketing here, but they call it the visual face of Hadoop. And there's a kind of bit of truth there in that I used to go out on the road years ago trying to demo data warehouses to customers, which is, you know, it's not the most kind of compelling of demos really. You're trying to show them Enterprise Manager and saying, here's a table and I'm querying it, and you know, that's interesting. But when we could use things like Discoverer and an OBI to basically put a front end on the data warehouse, it made sense. And so this again is kind of what, you know, this is what Big Data Discovery is good at doing. You can visualize the data in your data reservoir, okay? You can search it, you can catalog it, and so on there, okay? So we've got some use cases there, but what I'm going to do now is kind of go through an example, okay? Now this example is going to be on our data set. This is my company's data set, but tomorrow we're going to use Oracle's data. Well, we're going to use the data set based on the Oracle websites. So we can take a new one tomorrow. And so if you see my light on in my hotel room at like 5 in the morning, it's me kind of getting that working. So let's have a look here. So let's kind of go to the next bit for you. One common question that I'm not being asked now, but typically I'm asked is, going back to this actually, sorry. One of the things that Big Data Discovery is very good at is this thing called data discovery, as you'd imagine. Now, if you follow the Oracle BI kind of world and product releases, there's been a product come out called Visual Analyzer. Okay, so where are we here? There we go. So a tool called Visual Analyzer, and so this is the kind of this is the flagship tentpole kind of feature in OBI 12c, and it ostensibly seems very similar, but this is what we call managed data discovery, where we know the schema, where actually somebody's gone along and they've actually kind of gone through the data, they've curated it into dimensions and facts, and they've done things like kind of, you know, identified the numbers, identified the aggregation paths, and so on. Visual Analyzer is very good in that situation. And in fact, that's what you want to give to end users, where they're not particularly concerned that the data is Hadoop data. But if you are at an earlier stage in a project where it's just this kind of mess of data that really has no curation, it has no structure and so on, that's where Big Data Discovery comes in. And actually, I do a presentation where we use both tools together, and I show kind of where the two bits come in on the life cycle. Okay. So for the amount of so answering that question that nobody's asked there, that's kind of what that's about really. Here we go. So now, architecture-wise, it's a server that connects to your Hadoop cluster. So you have a Hadoop cluster. You then run this Big Data Discovery server, which can also be clustered. License-wise, it's licensed on the CPUs on the actual nodes running Big Data Discovery, not the entire cluster. So that's kind of good. Otherwise, it gets a bit like Big Data SQL and quite expensive. So there's the architecture there. But if you want to, you can download the Big Data Lite VM from OTN, and it has Big Data Discovery running on there. And so that's what I'm going to use tomorrow to do the demos. Okay, so you can actually, you know, play around with the examples yourself, and I can share the data and so on. So it has a number of features in there that are useful: searching, cataloging, joining, and analyzing the data. Now, if you've tried this, you might think, well, wow, you know, this is what's special about this. If you've tried to do this without a tool, it can get very complicated. And so in tomorrow's session, when I do this live, I'll start off by going into, you know, Hue, going into HDFS, looking at the files, trying to kind of work with it, and you'll see actually where the value in this comes in, because it's very point and click and so on. And so the example that we use in this presentation, I'll use a variation on this tomorrow, is for us. So we have a website, we have a blog, we have a Twitter account, we have various things kind of going on there, and we wanted to use a data reservoir or a data lake to understand the conversation around our website. Okay, so were people saying good things, bad things? Was there a conversation at all? What were the topics? You know, was it the fact that big data was popular in this part of the world but not in that part of the world? how will we do this? And so we brought 3 feeds into our data reservoir. We brought the actual website logs, so bringing them through live using Flume. We used Twitter, so we brought the Twitter stuff in as well. Twitter is by far the easiest one to bring into projects. Facebook is a bit more, you've got to pay for it, and LinkedIn is almost impossible to get hold of, to my mind, without paying a load of money. And then we actually brought the content to the website in as well. So we actually went to WordPress, did an export from WordPress, and we brought that into here as well. So these 3 data sources here going into our data reservoir. Okay, and we could put it into a business context. We could then link that to actual transactions and sales and activity and so on, and kind of timesheets that are stored in our Oracle database. So this is the kind of the social stuff, and then we can link it to actual activity. So for example, this article that we posted, which got tweeted about and commented on all this kind of stuff, did that then lead to an uptick in sales inquiries? Okay, and then actually tomorrow as well, I'm going to show you how we can use Oracle Big Data Spatial and Graph to understand the communities out there as well. But for now, we're just going to focus on what's going into here. So the objective exercise, as I say, is to understand who's talking about us and then kill them, basically. So so that's the kind of thing there. Right. So data sources we had our data reservoir over here. Okay, coming into there. We had big data discovery over here. Those of you who heard me talk about Spark earlier on, big data discovery, it runs on Spark. Okay, so what it does is it has an engine inside there that can run transformations, run data ingestions. It can do work with your data set within the cluster using Spark. And also there's an engine inside big data discovery which runs on a sample of data as well. But I'll explain to you how that works. So that comes in there. We bring our site content in as well. That goes into, now as I say, there's an engine called the dgraph engine, which is the successor to Endeca Server, and then we go and query it here. Now, one of the things that you have to do really, and almost every visual Hadoop tool does, is it works with a sample of data. So if you think about a Hadoop cluster, by definition, there can be quite a lot of data within it. That's kind of the idea of how it works. And you can, there's techniques you can use. You can use things like Parquet, and you can use Kudu and all this kind of stuff to let you run kind of queries against those. So you can get fairly fast queries to say how many tweets were there about us, how many kind of how many page views did this have. But if you want to do something really interactive and really fast, where the users can log in, they can click and they can move things around and they can do all this kind of clever work, then almost all the tools that work with this, like Datamir and all these ones, they work on the basis of doing a sample. And again, the kind of data scientist's secret weapon is they never work with the full set of data. They work with a sample. Okay. And so what Big Data Discovery does is it will just ingest a sample of data in, a representative sample, and then lets you kind of work around that, and you can visualize it and so on. But you have to bear in mind, though, that any counts you get will not be, so if you can't count how many mentions of Chris Saxon there are there in a kind of interesting way, then it will not give you the actual count of those. It will give you the count within that sample set there. But you can then later on go and do the full thing. Okay, so it's a sample set there, and the way it works is that you go and you basically, I'll show you on here actually, and I won't try and log in now. I'll show you all tomorrow live. And what you do is you make sure that any data that you want to bring into Big Data Discovery is registered in what's called HCatalog. Okay, so this is a tabular structure over your Hive data. Now, anyone, again, calling out in the audience here, how does it get into Hive in the first place? I'll show you tomorrow how that kind of happens. In fact, what we'll do tomorrow, I don't know if Chris is going to be in the audience, but I will actually kind of basically just use you as an example all the way through the thing here and just try and find things that you've said on Twitter that you would regret having kind of read out in front of an audience with no context whatsoever. Okay, so just to kind of really, kind of make it awkward for you. In fact, what I'll do is I'll put things into the data set tonight if there's something interesting in there. So, and pictures as well, there we go. So that's good. So anyway, the point is you ingest it into there. Your data has to have been in Hive first of all. It's in here like that. And then what you get is you get these projects being set up. So you'll find your data sets in here. So what you get now is a catalog of all of the sets of data in your data reservoir. Now these can be still in their raw form, but you can use Hive or other sort of structures or storage handlers or SERDES or whatever to actually kind of like present it out to here, and it then arrives in a catalog form in here. Okay, so you can now see all the kind of sets of data in your data reservoir. Okay, which is good. That's a good start. And what you do then, and say I'll show you this live tomorrow, and we'll do it, you know, with Chris's kind of personal data, and sort of do this, bring it into here, create a project, Chris's kind of end of career kind of on stage analysis, and then you see the things on here. Okay, so in this case here, what we've got is it's taken all of the columns and turned them into what we call attributes. But what it'll also do, and this is again quite useful, is it will do automatic enrichment. So if you think about an IP address, okay, so an IP address typically can be traced to a particular place, and there are IP address blocks that, you know, China or India or whatever, you know, through here and so on. So it will take the IP address and it will give you the geographic location. It will give you the city, the country, and all that kind of stuff, which is a real time saver because otherwise you're doing it yourself with lookup tables and so on. It splits it out here if it's a geocode. So if an IP address is there and it can then give you a kind of a country and a geocode, it will put that into a map for you. So you can see straight away the kind of, you know, which countries are kind of, you know, showing the kind of most interest. You can order it in terms of information potential. So you know, certain types of kind of distribution of values can have more potential in terms of usefulness to you. It does all this kind of stuff for you as well. And so with this example, you know, we loaded in stuff from the website, we loaded in kind of logs and all this kind of stuff, and this is all the data we had in here. So you can see that it's coming in a relatively useful form, but and this is the kind of the dirty secret of kind of big data, that a majority of your time is spent in cleaning up the data, and so what we call data wrangling. And so this is a thing that the tool can really help with. Let's have a look here. So yeah, there's the records there and so on. We can explore first of all, so we can go in there, we can explore the kind of distribution of data and filter it, all this kind of stuff. So it's got quite a nice kind of visual kind of like angle to it as well. So refinements and so on here. So let's go to Scratchpad here, produce. I might come back to this. Right, enrichment, here we go. I might come back to the bits. Now, so this is really important. So typically you're going to have to do something with the data before it's really useful to you. Now again, in the old days, we'd have to then say, right, give this to somebody who will then go and clean it up. It might be an ETL team. It might be a fairly kind of like long process. But this tool comes with data wrangling and data transformation enrichment features within there. Okay, so again, we'll see this tomorrow. Now, in case you just think this guy is just selling Oracle software, which I'm not, if I am doing very badly, there are other tools out there that do a very similar job. Okay, so you've got things like Datamere, there's Platfora. This is a fairly common sort of like type of kind of piece of software out there really. So big data discovery, it does certain things well. It does the joining of data sets well, but other tools are out there that you could use as well. Okay. Plus there are other projects out there coming along like Apache Zeppelin and various things there. So where I'm talking to you about big data discovery, obviously this is about this product, but there are other ones out there that do similar kind of work. But going back to this, the data wrangling thing here. So imagine now we've got a situation where we want to do some kind of grouping of values or cleansing or binning of data and so on. We can go in there, select data cleansing, group values on there. So in this case here, we want to take the HTTP response codes out of the log files and then group them into 500, 501, 502, all this kind of stuff there into more meaningful kind of categories. So things like it was a client error, server error. And this is trying to help us understand when somebody accessed the website, did they actually get a page back or did it error and that sort of thing. And how many requests did we have for pages that have kind of moved and stuff like that. Also data type conversions. So things like taking, Twitter has this weird kind of date format that it's quite hard to work with. So you can put Java date patterns into there and so on and do this. So in this case here, we can go in and we can transform the data and so on. As I say, we'll see this in action tomorrow really in kind of how it works. Now this is also good. We can go in and we can apply Groovy transformations. So I can go in and extract things like sentiment, or extract nouns, and extract kind of like, words and terms and so on. So in this case here, I'm going in, I'm not sure what I'm doing over here. Let's have a look. That's the, it's over here, isn't it? I can't even read it from here, actually. It's something, anyway, I can't think what it is. Extract nouns, I'm not sure. Anyway, so in this case here, we're getting out, and so the point of this bit here is to look at the Twitter text, for example, or the kind of or maybe the kind of words in the blog post, and get out of it keywords and so on. Okay, so there again, if you want to go outside of this and look at open source, there are open source packages out there that can do similar sort of work, but this is this is kind of packaged up and so on. There we go. And so on and so forth. So we can go in here, we can create new attributes and so on here. And do this. Now, what's interesting here is I'm not sure. I don't think I can VPN here. So I was going to log in, but I'll do this tomorrow for you. Now, what's also good here is that we're working with this sample data set where everything is very interactive. Everything is in memory. It's loaded into the dgraph engine as we talked about, and it's all kind of running interactively in memory. Now, we can any kind of like changes we make to here are written into a script, which you can then execute, and it will then make that transformation on the full set of data within that sample. Okay, so at this point here, we're previewing stuff. We can then run the transformation scripts and so on here, and then we can commit that back. So in the example I'm going to run tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're going to take the Twitter data that comes in from Oracle, from the Oracle websites, with the additional bits in, I'm putting about Chris and so on in there. And then it lands in this kind of JSON format, okay? We're then going to use what we call Hive JSON SERDI to then allow us to look at that data in a tabular form without changing it in that format there. There's some work we have to do outside of big data discovery to make this work. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to restore the data in what we call Parquet format, and I'll explain why tomorrow, to do with kind of line breaks and so on. At that point, the tool then kicks in. And so tomorrow, what I'm going to do then is when it comes into big data discovery, I'm going to then take this kind of raw data, I'm going to enrich it, I'm going to also use it for sentiment analysis. So I'm going to look at all of the kind of the tweets and so on, look at the text of them and so on. It can detect the language. So, it can detect if I'm not sure if it would do like Latvian or whatever, but it would certainly do kind of English, French, German, and so on there. So if it's a kind of like a thing in German, it will kind of tell me if it's kind of rude or whatever. And then I'll be doing this transformation within here. Now, what you can also do is you can write this back not only to the sample data set, but you can write it back to the entire data set within Hadoop as well. So I can create derived tables out of here, which I can then analyze further on in, for example, OBI if I want to. Okay, so I can store that in say, Parquet format and do that. So I tend to use big data discovery as a bit of a kind of ETL tool myself, actually. So I use it on projects that involve big data. I typically use this as my first tool that I kind of connect to the data set to let me understand the general kind of look and feel of the data, and do this kind of like, almost first responder style sort of like changing of the data and kind of wrangling of it before it then goes into a format that's more usable by end users. And so that's writing it back to there. And actually, the last bit that I want to show you is under the covers, it's using all these kind of all these Hadoop standard technologies to do the work. So this is Oozie running here. This is kind of Hue that I'll show you tomorrow as well. And so it's using Oozie for workflow. It's using Hive. It's using kind of Spark. It's all fairly generic kind of like Hadoop technology. But then what you can also do is you can bring in data as well. Now, again, in any kind of big data project, there's typically going to be data that's external to Hadoop that you want to kind of use, maybe for kind of lookups or for reference data or whatever. So what we do tomorrow is when we bring the Oracle data in, I might create some little Excel sheets that have kind of lookup values on there to say, various things. You can also go and get, for example, details of the websites that are referenced in the tweets as well from there. We can do all that kind of stuff as well. I think something also that I'm going to do tomorrow as well in the session, I'll see if I can show you along here. So what I also do tomorrow is use this tool here. So this, oh, you can't see it actually, don't think, can you now? Let's have a look. That wasn't a good move, was it? Can you see my screen? No, hang on. Oh, there it is there, that. So what I'm also going to do tomorrow is load this into Oracle Graph and Spatial, Oracle Big Data Graph and Spatial, and then take that same data set and load it into a graph database, and then use it to identify who the top influencers are within this data set as well. So this is where it uses something called PageRank, which is made famous by Google, where what we do is we look at, for example, if we look at Oracle Magazine here, or Ask Tom or something over there, we look at how many people kind of reference it and how many people kind of mention it in kind of conversation. And what we do, and without giving too much away, is we look at, for example, a retweet, we look at a kind of a reply, we look at a mention. Is a mention, for example, more meaningful than a retweet? If I was to retweet somebody, that implies that that person is quite a big influence on me. Okay. If I just mention them, it's more of a kind of community sort of thing. So what we do tomorrow as well is we take this data out of Big Data Discovery and we load it into this as well. And I'll show you this tomorrow in the session. Okay, so back into here. So we bring in data here from external. We can load it in from spreadsheets and so on. Now again, what's useful here is joining data sets. So if we had, for example, a spreadsheet, in my case, of all the kind of the actual contents of the website, so all the page contents and so on, I can link that to the actual kind of like web hits we're getting to say, right, for every web hit we have, what was the meaning of that page? What was it about? What was the content about? Am I getting generally negative comments about this page here or positive ones or whatever? And this joining of stuff here, I know from a relational world, this is what we do every day. But this is quite a big deal how this kind of works, really. So I'll show you that tomorrow in the workshop. And so we're joining here, blah, 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 there we go, joining there on that, and so on. And then what we finally get then is the ability to visualize it. Now, and this is back again to the heritage of this product from Endeca Information Discovery, where we can create these kind of on-the-fly visualizations. So things like word clouds and graphs and charts and so on to help us get a picture of the data. Now, what I wouldn't use this for is then give this to a whole bunch of end users who really are just looking for a simple kind of query tool, because this is, going back to the question about schema on read versus schema on write. Using a data lake allows you to shortcut all the work you normally do to create the data. But you put a massive emphasis on the end users then knowing what they get themselves into, because they're querying data where you have not defined the schema. You've not defined any keys. A key would be fantastic in this. Even just like a definition of a table would be good. So this is great for when you've got people who know what they're doing, okay? But it's not great if you've got people who don't know what they're doing, because they can get themselves in a right mess. This is like the old days of not having any keys or anything at all, and a bit like e-business suite, for example. So we can visualize stuff here. The good thing about this, gives you a picture of the data. It helps you understand the kind of the structure of the data, so that you can then focus your work on what's interesting. And putting a kind of a project angle on it. What we find this is useful for again as well is to let the customer get involved in a project. So if we're doing a big data project, it's usually so far ahead of anything the customer's used to working with. They haven't got a chance of being involved. But with this, we can take a data set, give it to them and say, look, here's the data in your data reservoir. We've done some work on it. You can now fiddle around with it and play around with it and so on, really. It lets them get involved in the project. Okay, so just kind of moving on to the end bit here. Let's have a look. So there's the discovery page there. The last bit really, and as I say, we'll cover this more tomorrow, is this thing called faceted search. So if you think about the mess that your data reservoir is going to be within a short amount of time, imagine any system you build where the DBA's basically got a holiday for a year and there's no kind of governance or any rules at all or anything at all. What a mess that's going to be. And so what you can do with this as well as having the cataloging in there, is that you can do this thing called faceted search, where you can go in, and this is going to be very interesting tomorrow, because I can go across my entire data set and I can look for anything that says Chris Saxon across any kind of any kind of thing, whether it's a tweet, whether it's somebody mentioning him in a tweet, whether it's something else. And so this is kind of very good for exploratory work, investigative work, and and that sort of thing, really. So we can do this tomorrow and basically really dig the dirt really on somebody and understand kind of what's going on. And in fact, what I might do tonight, rather than going out, is just search the internet for anything I can find really that is going to incriminate our colleague there, or our special guest from Oracle there in this session. That's what I'll do tonight, actually. If anybody else has got anything on him at all, then give it to me tomorrow and we can put it in the workshop and we can kind of go through it and sort of talk it through. So you see, it's quite different to BI. It's much more interesting than kind of BI, really. This talk tomorrow, I'm going to show you how it works tomorrow. We'll go into the detail, we'll do a demo and kind of see how the mechanics of it work, plus some of the lower level stuff about using Parquet and using Hive and using HDFS and so on and so forth. And then at the end of it, we've got this kind of total kind of data set really about kind of Oracle's activity and particular people. We can then we know exactly what we're interested in. We can then export that into Hive tables from big data discovery. We understand the structure. We understand what we're interested in. We can then put that into OBI or any other tool like business objects or whatever, and we can then query it in a much more kind of structured way, using kind of normal query tools, okay, because we know what we're after then at that point. So it's 6:45, 7:15. Is it 6:45 or 7:45? It's late anyway. It's 7:45, isn't it? I think, or 6:30 anyway. There's a lot in that, and I'm conscious that it's all been slides so far. So if you are around tomorrow, I think if you're one of the people coming along, we'll go into the detail of it. There's also stuff on the website. I've written a lot about this in the past. Any questions or thoughts or kind of comments before we sort of finish up? Any sort of thoughts? Chris, how do you feel tomorrow about being the inadvertent kind of sort of, so Chris Saxon at the back there, you probably know from Ask Tom. So he's volunteered to be the kind of he's given me all his passwords to all his online accounts, and we're gonna basically go through all his kind of stuff there. But any questions at all or thoughts? No. Okay, so if you're around tomorrow in the session, 9 o'clock, thank you for that one, 9 o'clock, 9 till 12, going into the detail, I'll have the examples and demos, we'll do it live, we'll go through the data set and see how it works. Other than that, thank you very much. Thank you.